In the shadowy annals of Greek mythology, where gods meddle and mortals suffer, there exists a tale of vengeance so profound, so utterly consuming, that it has echoed through the ages. This is the story of a princess, stripped of her birthright, who nursed a singular burning desire for justice. This is the story of Electra, the princess of revenge. Join us as we journey back to the age of heroes and build, brick by brick, the tragic saga of the House of Atreus. Our story begins not with Electra, but with a curse, a stain upon a royal lineage that would poison generations. This is the curse of the House of Atreus, and it demanded a terrible price. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and leader of the Greek armies, prepared to sail for Troy, but his fleet lay becalmed, the winds refusing to fill their sails. The goddess Artemis, offended by the king's hubris, demanded a sacrifice. Not a bull, not a ram, but his own flesh and blood. His eldest daughter, Iphigenia. Torn between his duty as a king and his love as a father, Agamemnon made a fateful choice. He summoned his daughter under the false pretense of marrying her to the great hero Achilles. Iphigenia arrived, her heart full of hope, only to be led to a sacrificial altar. As the blade fell, the winds rose, and 1,000 ships of the Achaean fleet set sail for war. But back in Mycenae, a heart turned to stone. Queen Clytemnestra, Iphigenia's mother, would never forgive her husband. The seeds of hatred were sown, and they would bear bitter, bloody fruit. 10 long years passed. The Trojan War was fought and won. Agamemnon, the victorious king, returned to Mycenae, laden with spoils and glory. He brought with him a prize of war, the Trojan prophetess Cassandra. He expected a hero's welcome, a triumphant return to his palace and his family. But the home he left was not the one he returned to. In his absence, Clytemnestra's grief had festered into a cold, calculated rage. She had taken a lover, Aegisthus, Agamemnon's own cousin and a sworn enemy of his family. Together, they had plotted the king's downfall. As Agamemnon stepped into his bath, weary from his long journey, the trap was sprung. Clytemnestra, feigning a warm welcome, entangled him in a net-like robe. He was helpless. It was then that she and Aegisthus struck, again and again, murdering the king in a brutal act of betrayal. The halls of the palace, once filled with sounds of victory, now echoed with the king's dying screams. The curse had claimed another victim. For Agamemnon's remaining children, the world shattered. The young prince Orestes was whisked away into exile, smuggled out of the palace to save him from Aegisthus's blade. But his sister, Electra, was left behind. She became a prisoner in her own home, a ghost haunting the corridors of power. Clytemnestra and Aegisthus now ruled Mycenae, their hands stained with her father's blood. They treated Electra with contempt, stripping her of her royal status and forcing her to live as a servant. Every day was a living nightmare. She witnessed her mother celebrating the anniversary of her father's murder, feasting and drinking on the very day he died. She was tormented, humiliated, and watched constantly, lest she try to incite a rebellion. While others in the palace moved on, either out of fear or convenience, Electra refused to forget. The memory of her father, the image of his murder, was seared into her mind. She mourned openly, her grief a constant, silent rebellion against the usurpers. Her sorrow hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. She would not rest, she would not know peace until her father was avenged. She placed all her hope on one distant star, the return of her brother, Orestes. Years turned into a decade, and Electra's hope began to fray. She was a woman now, her youth spent in servitude and sorrow. Aegisthus, fearing she might marry a nobleman and produce an heir who could challenge his throne, forced her into a marriage with a poor farmer, hoping to extinguish the royal line forever. She lived in a humble hut, far from the splendors of the palace, yet she kept her vigil. One day, a group of travelers arrived in Mycenae. Among them was a young man, his face hardened by years in exile. It was Orestes, now grown, returned in secret under the guidance of the god Apollo himself. His mission, ordained by the oracle at Delphi, was to reclaim his father's throne by spilling his mother's blood. Orestes first went to his father's tomb to pay his respects. It was there he found Electra, weeping as she always did. At first, she did not recognize the stranger before her, but when he showed her a lock of his hair, identical to her own, and a piece of cloth she had woven for him as a child, the truth dawned. Brother and sister, separated by tragedy, were finally reunited. Their shared grief and purpose merged into an unstoppable force. Standing over their father's grave, they swore a sacred oath. The time for weeping was over. The time for revenge had come. The plan was as cunning as it was brutal. Orestes, disguised as a traveler from a foreign land, gained entry to the palace. He brought with him a funerary urn and a terrible message. Prince Orestes was dead. Upon hearing the news, Clytemnestra's reaction was complex, a flicker of relief mixed with a pang of maternal regret she had long suppressed. Aegisthus, however, was overjoyed. With Orestes gone, his throne was finally secure. He summoned the messenger to hear the details of his rival's demise. This was the moment Orestes had waited for. Once alone with the tyrant, Orestes revealed his true identity and, before Aegisthus could even cry for help, struck him down with his sword. Avenging the first part of his father's murder, now came the most dreadful act. Clytemnestra, hearing the commotion, rushed in. She found Aegisthus dead and stood face to face with the son she thought was gone forever. She saw the sword in his hand and knew her time had come. She pleaded for her life, bearing the breast that had nursed him as a baby, begging him to spare the mother who gave him life. Orestes hesitated, his resolve wavering. It is a terrible thing to kill one's own mother. But urged on by his sister and the divine command of Apollo, he hardened his heart. He dragged her to the spot where Aegisthus lay, and there, he completed the terrible cycle of vengeance. The curse demanded blood for blood. The act was done. Agamemnon was avenged. But in the world of Greek tragedy, no deed, especially one as terrible as matricide, goes unpunished. As the blood of Clytemnestra cooled, a new horror was unleashed. From the depths of the underworld, ancient and terrible goddesses of vengeance awoke. They were the Furies, the Erinyes, with snakes for hair and eyes that dripped blood. They were the divine punishers of those who spilled kindred blood. And now, they had come for Orestes. Invisible to all but him, they swarmed around him, their incessant whispers driving him to the brink of madness. He fled Mycenae, a haunted man, pursued relentlessly across the lands of Greece. He was plagued by visions, his mind shattered by guilt and terror. The revenge that was supposed to bring peace had only brought a fresh hell. Electra, who had willed this revenge into being, was left behind in the blood-soaked palace, her victory tasting of ash. She had achieved her life's purpose, but at what cost? She was free from her oppressors, but her brother, her only remaining family, was now a tormented fugitive, lost to insanity. The tale of Electra does not end with a simple victory. It ends with a profound question about the nature of justice and the destructive cycle of revenge. Orestes would eventually find his way to Athens, where he was put on trial before the gods themselves, with Apollo as his defense and the Furies as his accusers. He was acquitted, and the Furies were transformed into benevolent spirits, finally breaking the curse on the house of Atreus. But the story of Electra remains a powerful, timeless tragedy. Her name has become synonymous with a daughter's fierce loyalty and an obsession with vengeance. The Electra complex in psychology speaks to the enduring power of her myth. Her story teaches us that the desire for retribution, no matter how justified, often consumes the avenger. It shows that violence begets violence, and that the path of hatred leads only to more suffering. Electra's journey, from a grieving princess to the architect of a bloody revenge, is a dark mirror held up to one of humanity's most primal instincts. It forces us to ask, when does justice become vengeance? And is any victory worth the price of one's own soul? The bricks of this ancient story build a monument to a terrible truth, that true peace cannot be found at the end of a sword, and that the deepest wounds are the ones we inflict upon ourselves in the name of justice. Thank you for joining us on this tragic journey through the house of Atreus. If you were captivated by this Lego retelling of a classic myth, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from history and legend. Let us know in the comments which myth you'd like to see us build next. Until then, farewell.